Well, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to our friends in the United States. We are in... could someone just hit that symbol there? Thanks, Grace. This is our first time in the Sakyamuni Centre, Vietnamese temple here in Canberra, and you can see how beautiful the altars are here. There's many different altars in this space. And we're very fortunate that we've been offered this space to stay in as our new Zendo home. Early in my practice, I came across Tibetan Buddhist teachings called Logong training, mind training. And they consist of 59 short little sort of pithy phrases that can help us train our minds in our daily life. They come from an early Indian text called the 7 Points of Mind Training by Atisha Dipankara Siranjana. And they were kind of made well known in the United States by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and by Pema Chodron, who many people are familiar with. And there's this little book here that has the 59 phrases in them, and they're referred to as slogans, which when I first heard that word it felt uncomfortable because we think of slogans as little phrases to encourage us to buy things, like for advertising. And when I looked up the definition, in fact there are 3 definitions, and the first was that it's a war cry, which is kind of interesting. We could think of a war cry as a powerful calling out to people to not harm each other. We could have a war cry like that. Don't do that. Please don't think such terrible things about yourself or about others. It could be a war cry. And then the other definition of slogan was a pithy, short statement in the advertising industry, which is how I thought of the word, and also in political campaigning. And then the third definition was just a strong, brief statement that is memorable and influential. And I think that's kind of the way we think of this word here, these 59 slogans. So I thought I would just go through a few of them, obviously not all 59, because they had a very big impact on me early in practice. What's good about these very short phrases is if you memorize the ones that work for you, then when you're just going about your daily life, they can pop into your mind and you can remember them, and it can help kind of steer you a little bit when you're trying to make a decision. Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I be thinking this way, or would it be better to be thinking that way? Maybe some of these slogans would help. So it comes from this text called the 7 Points of Mind Training. So I'll just list those 7 points, and it's within them that there are a certain number of these short little phrases, or short little instructions, you could even call them. So the first one is train in the preliminaries, and that's the one that I'd probably like to talk about today. Train in bodhicitta, which is loving kindness. Transform bad circumstances into the path of enlightenment. I think this has been one of the strongest driving forces in my own practice is to transform unfortunate circumstances, unfortunate just to put it lightly, to transform difficult, tragic, painful, harmful circumstances into the path of enlightenment. And then the fourth point is utilize practice in one's whole life. So we don't practice just part-time. It's not a part-time thing, what we do. It's not just on the cushion or just when it's convenient. We're training in these teachings for our whole life, for 24/7, for our whole life, for every hour of every day of our whole life. Which means we just want to be holding these teachings in our minds and letting them inform us so that we are beneficial beings in the world. And the fifth point is evaluation of mind training, and then disciplines of mind training, and then guidelines of mind training. So I'll read just a little from the introductory section before going into this first one. So the root text of the 7 points of training of the mind is a list of 59 slogans which form a pithy summary instruction on the view and practical application of Mahayana Buddhism. The study and practice of these slogans is very practical and earthy, and it's a way of reversing ego clinging and of cultivating tenderness and compassion. They provide a method of training our minds through both formal meditation practice and using the events of everyday life as a means of awakening. Through slogan practice, we begin to realize that our habitual tendency, even in our smallest gestures, is one of self-centeredness. That tendency is quite entrenched and affects all of our activities, even our so-called benevolent activities. The practice is based upon the spontaneous recall of appropriate slogans in the thick of daily life. Rather than making a heavy-handed or deliberate effort to guide your actions in accordance with the slogans, a quality of spontaneous reminder is evoked through the study of these traditional aphorisms. If you study these 7 points of mind training and memorize the slogans, you will find that they arise effortlessly in your mind at the oddest times. They have a haunting quality, and in their recurrence they can lead you gradually to a more and more subtle understanding of the nature of kindness and compassion. As is usual in Buddhist teachings, there is an element of playfulness and irony in the way one slogan often undermines its predecessor and thereby enlarges one's view. They form a loop in which nothing is excluded. Whatever arises in one's mind or experience is let go into the greater space of awareness that slogan practice generates. It is this openness of mind that becomes the basis for the cultivation of compassion. In their earthliness and simplicity, may these teachings inspire us to cultivate kindness and compassion and not to give up on ourselves or others. May they provoke fearlessness in overcoming the tenacious grip of ego. May they enable us to put into practice our most beautiful, heartfelt aspirations to benefit all sentient beings on the path of awakening. Yeah, so What we want to do is notice what goes on in our minds. That's really the main thing. We want to notice what's going on in our minds and be able to assess whether what we are thinking is beneficial to us and beneficial to others. And as simple as that seems, I think a lot of the time, for a lot of people, they actually don't really notice that much what is going on in their minds. Or what they're doing is they're so enamored by their thinking that they've become lost in the thinking itself, in the content of the thinking, and think that what they're thinking is actually reality. And they're not examining whether it's beneficial to them or others to be thinking in the way that they are thinking. They're just caught in a habit. Most of us are caught in some habits to some degree, and some people more so than others. So the first one, train in the preliminaries. I remember when I saw this, it seems like it's not saying very much, train in the preliminaries. But for me, it has this sense of there is something really essential. It's like a framework that we either have a conscious framework that we're working in or an unconscious one. And this is encouraging us to have an actual conscious framework, a conscious way in which we understand reality. And of course, reality doesn't care about preliminaries, doesn't care about any list of things, because these are just words, they're just our construction. But because we do think in words, and we think in concepts, even though those words and concepts can't reach reality itself, we do think in them, so we might as well try and have a very conscious sense of what it is that we take as the kind of underlying truth of the way the world works. It would be good for us to have an idea of what that is, and then maybe to cultivate a brief set of ideas or statements about reality that is wholesome, that we can then function from and keep kind of in the forefront of our mind as we go about our life. So in this particular set, train in the preliminaries, there's a set of 4. It doesn't have to be these 4. I would add a few different ones. So I'll go through the 4 and then maybe a few others. And the reason it doesn't matter whether it's these particular 4 or a group of 7 is because reality doesn't function that way. Reality isn't made up of lists. It's not made up of language. Trees don't care whether we call them trees or not. The river doesn't think of itself as a river. The Milky Way doesn't know it's called the Milky Way. It's just swirling along. So the first preliminary is to remember the preciousness of a human life, or the preciousness of human life. And in our tradition, this is really a strong encouragement to use the life that we have as well as we can, which doesn't mean we have to go out and heroically do a million things. It just means to value the fact that we have this human life. And maybe one way we can think about why is human life such a special thing to have? Maybe it's because we have a kind of consciousness that does seem to be really particular to us. We're conscious not just of, say, feeling pain, we're conscious of the fact that we're feeling pain. So it's not just that we feel pain, but we know that we do. It's not just that we see that others suffer, we know that they do. We're aware that we're aware of things. We're aware that we're aware that there's a sky and that there are clouds and that there are birds. We're aware of it. And we seem to be a little unique in that regard. Some of you may have heard Brian Cox, the astrophysicist, talk about this, that it really could well be, coming from a place of understanding how life evolves, it could well be that we are the only conscious beings in our particular galaxy. It could well be that we are. It's taken it's taken millions of years of stability on this particular planet for life to evolve to the point that it has evolved to. So it might well be that we're the only being around that can think about itself and can think about the things around us. And that seems to be something really wonderful. I sometimes feel that just my witnessing of something's existence is valuable. If I'm walking through the landscape and I see trees and I see a kookaburra go by, I feel that just the fact that I see you, I hear you, I witness you. There seems to be something valuable in that. And of course, Indigenous cultures have said this all along. There's a story about how rare it is to be born human. It's interesting that Buddhism is really good at finding ways to describe extremely large numbers and extremely small numbers, and extremely large periods of time and probabilities. It's really interesting, very creative way. So the way it's talked about for being born as a human, it's like there is a wooden yoke. You might have seen images of people when they carry water with two buckets. They have a piece of wood across the neck and it has a curve so it doesn't hurt your neck, and you can carry the water that way. That's called a yoke. And then when you have a yoke for an animal that's going to be ploughing the field, it has another piece of wood the other way. It's joined so there's a hole in the middle, two pieces of wood joined with a hole. So this thing called a yoke, wooden yoke, if there was one of those pieces of wood floating in the ocean, just one, in all of the oceans of the world, just floating on the surface, bobbing on the surface, and there was only one giant turtle swimming in the oceans of the world, the chances of us being born human is equivalent to the chance of that turtle coming up for a breath of air and putting its head through that yoke. That's the traditional Indian way of describing the probability. And the effect that that has for me when I first heard that was to have this sense of like, oh my gosh, I want to value this life. I want to look after this human life, and I want to look after other lives. It's so rare. But I also had the thought, and the teaching also says this, it's not saying in any way that we are better than other animals, for example. That's not the point of the teaching at all. Because clearly we do terrible harm in a way that no other species does. We harm the earth in ways that other species don't. We harm each other in ways that other species don't. So we certainly are not superior to any other sentient life in this world. But we do have this particular capacity. We think of it as like a karmic capacity. We have this incredible capacity to intentionally do things. We have choices. It's like we're at forks in the road every moment of our life. Every moment of every day we have a choice, this way or this way. Do I do this or do I do this? Over and over and over we have this choice. So we're kind of different that way. So this training in the preliminaries, the first preliminary is that. The second preliminary is the reality of death, the reality of inevitability of our own death, that it's going to happen, and we never know when. and of everybody else, every other sentient being, and insentient and non-sentient. Even non-sentient things fall apart. They come together and they fall apart. So everything is being born and dying, being born and dying in the conventional, in the sense of the conventional world. Everything's coming together and falling apart. It's good for us to contemplate that in ourselves and in others. I think it's very helpful to think about that when we're feeling some animosity towards someone, just to remember that they are fragile, that everyone is fragile, even if they don't seem fragile. It can help soften our relationship to people. If we have some difficulty with someone, we just can remember, they too are going to pass away one day. I wonder what that will be like for them. And because we have this knowing of our own mortality, there's also a kind of this urge to stay alive. Most of us have this strong urge to stay alive. And that applies to all the little insects and any other animals that we encounter. They all want to stay alive. It's good for us to remember that when there's death, there's also fear of death. And everything wants to stay alive, generally speaking, for as long as it can, generally speaking. So we can help look after all of that and feel tender towards the fact of that, of our own impending death and that of everybody else. So that's another preliminary to train in. So to train just means, to just bring it to mind, rather than thinking random thoughts about nothing in particular, some movie that we watched or something that we saw on YouTube or something or other, something somebody said. Rather than just having those sorts of things just rattling around, we can train in the preliminaries. Bring things to mind, intentionally bring them to mind. Preciousness of this human life, inevitability of everyone's death. And after a while they start to just, we don't have to really bring them to mind, they just arrive, they just pop in anyway, they just arrive. It's really nice when practice is like that, and the teachings just inform the way we think and the way we act, without us having to be effortful about it. And then the third in the training in the preliminaries is karma. That all of our actions have an effect. All actions have an effect, whether it's a positive effect, a negative effect, or a fairly neutral effect. Or sometimes a mixed effect, both a bit helpful and a bit harmful. It can be mixed. To really contemplate that everything that we say and do, and that we think, that it all has an effect. And it's really the one thing that we carry with us throughout our life. All our physical possessions and things like status and that sort of thing. Those things and roles that we may have, parent, child, employee and so on, all of those kind of fade out at the point of dying, really. But who we've been, the impact that we've had on the world, impact that we can't possibly know. We can't know the ripple effect of our actions and of our words. We can't know. But we can endeavour to have good ripple effects in the world. We can endeavour to do that. But that's what we have with us. That's kind of really what we have with us at the end of our life. So it's good to contemplate that. And the last of the four preliminaries listed here is the inevitability of suffering, which might sound a little depressing, but it's not really. We all kind of know that in any day there's going to be some degree of just simple physical discomfort at the very least, a little bit. A bus will be late, or can't find a restroom, or something we want in the fridge isn't there. Just little ways like that. It's inevitable. And then inevitably there's bigger ones. So to see the suffering in our own life and see the suffering, inevitability of suffering in others' lives, helps us to cultivate compassion. Helps us to cultivate a general outlook of kindness and care for others. For myself, if I think of training the preliminaries, what often comes to my mind mostly is the sort of interpenetration of everything. That I exist because of all the things that others have done. Other people, other plants and animals, other minerals and gases and so on that make it possible for me to exist. That I'm made up of all of these things other than myself. And that this applies to everybody else and to everything else. It's total interdependence and interpenetration of everything. I find that a very helpful teaching. And the outcome of that, when you really think about it at length, is that you as a separate self don't really exist. That I as a separate entity don't really exist. That my existence, I am brought into existence by everything around me. Not by myself. I don't bring myself into existence. Everybody else does. And it's a really lovely way to slowly let go of self-concern instead of feeling a strong sense that you exist separately and then have worries about that. You can kind of soften, and instead you can think, how amazing that this kind of strange, fluid thing called Neti exists, whatever our names might be. That we're constantly being created by everything around us. It's very spacious. You keep on contemplating that, it becomes very spacious. You can just start super simply, like, how did I get to be who I am? I actually need someone to help me figure out how to turn off these notifications. They just started by themselves. And now they just keep on happening. So, another job to get round to. Okay. It's ridiculously easy to do, I'm sure. I just don't know how. See, there's a co-creation here. Ginny's going to help me stop having these notifications coming up on my laptop. Co-created moment. And then one more that I would add in terms of what I like to train in terms of training in the preliminaries, is the whole teaching on true nature or Buddha nature, that everything that exists is worthy of being treated with respect. Everything, without exception, is worthy of being treated with respect. Because this teaching of true nature, or Buddha nature, it's not saying that everything is good in the conventional sense of good, but just that everything is, and because it is, we should care. We should care about it. That there's nothing that is actually evil in the world. There's nothing that's actually bad in any essential way. Things can be bad in a conventional way, as in not a good idea to drink this poison. In that sense, it's bad. But the poison is not actually bad. Its essence isn't bad. Its essence just is what it is. If it exists, it's just because it exists. There's nothing actually bad. It's very powerful teaching that there's nothing that's actually in any absolute sense bad or evil in any way. It can just function in a way that is harmful. People can be harmful. Substances can be harmful. Thoughts can be harmful. Actions can be harmful. But there's no actual thing called bad that is bad. There's no actual thing that's bad. It really, actually, all of these teachings they all fold into each other, because that teaching, what it does is, if you think, well, if nothing's actually bad, how come this person is acting so bad? Then you go into cause and effect and see, oh, well, if you look at their history, it makes total sense that they're being the way they're being. All of these teachings actually are like windows looking through, or windows looking into reality. Doesn't matter which window you look through. It all gets you to the same place in the end. So that was just the first slogan, training the preliminaries. Maybe over the next few months I might talk about some of the others. All right, I think I'll finish there with this part, and really like it if anyone would like to ask anything or share anything, either here in the Zendo or online. Just put your hands in Gusho if you'd like to say something. James.
I was just wondering if you could talk a bit more about the difference between maybe concern and respect, because you said seeing through the illusion of a separate self can help you to let go of self-concern. And I thought maybe that can be a problem sometimes if you feel like you have trouble being concerned enough for yourself.
Enough about yourself, yeah.
Taking enough care of yourself, you can fall into kind of letting yourself go, or like not doing enough to actually do everything that you need to feel well and well.
Yeah.
And do you think, and then immediately after that, I thought maybe that would be part of the answer, is like trying to see everything as worthy of respect, I think. And can you talk more about the difference between those two?
Yeah. So I don't know if you could hear all of that online, but let's see if I just simply paraphrase it as best as I can, or compress. James is asking that I said something about we can reduce our self-concern when we don't think of ourselves as existing as a separate entity, which is a good thing to have less self-concern. But what about this point of respecting all things? What's the relationship between diminishing self-concern but still needing to have self-respect? Is that a good? Okay. That's a really good thing to bring up. So self-concern is usually what we're referring to is that tendency. It's not actually self-concern in a way. What happens in our minds is we worry about what other people think of us. I mean, that's a thing that people do. They worry about what other people think of them, and it's not actually other people, it's your idea of other people. And we can get overly caught up in our identity. Like we think this idea of thinking that we truly exist as a separate entity. This is why I really like that teaching of interpenetration, that I exist because of everybody else. There's no actual Neti. It's just everything else but Neti. There's no thing actually that's Neti at all. It's everything else other. Can't find this thing Neti. When we think that way, we still look after ourselves because we are made of everything. It's like we want to respect everything, and everything includes ourself. We need to care for ourselves. It's just holding it that at the same time, this self that we're caring for is just a provisional kind of, it's an appearance. Like you appear as James, as a completely separate person, and you definitely need to look after yourself. One way of looking at it is, although I don't exist as an independent being, on a practical level, it makes a lot more sense for me to feed myself than to try and get somebody else to do it. Like that would just be So silly. So there's certain jobs that it's much better for us in this particular body to do ourselves, like feeding ourselves and getting dressed and all those sorts of things. Going to work, it wouldn't really make sense for somebody else to try and do it, make us, get us in a car and take us there. So there's certain jobs that we just do ourselves, and we really need to do that. It's just on a practical level. But we can even think about that as that self-care, that self-respect, that self-care is for the benefit of everybody, including ourselves. Like we do it. It is important for me to look after me most of the time because I'm the one around. I'm in the body, so I look after it. But even why do I do that? Because it's a good idea for everybody for me to do that, including me. Like everybody includes me. Everything includes me. So I do it for everyone, including myself. So the self-concern is really that kind of corrosive self-concern that we're talking about letting go of, where we think that we actually solidly exist and we're worried about having our needs met more than we, like, almost as if there's some stinginess in the universe that I have to protect looking after my needs, and I have to worry about what people think of me, as if there's this sort of pressure coming in to take things from me or something like that. I don't know if I've explained that very well. Does that sound all right?
Yes.
Yeah. So. Anyone else want to ask anything or share anything? Yes, Junie.
I had a fairly close friend die unexpectedly recently, so things kind of landed deeper, I guess, than they otherwise might have. Thanks for that.
Yeah. My condolences. I was just thinking how little children often feel completely invincible, and they love the superheroes and they feel like they can just do anything. I remember my son, I was saying, you've got to put your seatbelt on. He went, no, if there's going to be a car accident, I'm just going to go like this and I'll be fine. Like, okay, but you still have to put your seatbelt on. But as we grow a little older, we start to not feel so immortal, and then things happen, like we lose people that we know. Yeah, it can help make us a little more tender towards each other.
That really spoke to me when you were saying.
Say that again?
That really spoke to me before when you were talking about the contemplation of death, softening your way of relating to other people.
Yeah.
That's really smart.
Yeah, so this is what training in the preliminaries is talking about, being able to keep things like this. We don't have to keep it in our minds like in the prefrontal cortex in language particularly, but just a felt sense of everybody's fragility, just a felt sense of that fragility, which it could be seen as depressing, but actually when it's understood fully, it actually just opens our heart up and makes us feel more care and includes ourselves, of course, as well, our own fragility in this particular body that we happen to have. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the recording.